Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking the movie Captain Marvel. Now I live in Japan, and this movie came out about 4 days ago here, 4 or 5 days ago. So I know I'm a little behind everybody else. No getting around that. Um, anyway, I was able to go see the movie today because it was one of my days off work. Now, I was also off work on Sunday, but they've recently released a new Doraemon movie here in Japan. And you got to understand, Doraemon is like an iconic kids series here in Japan. And one thing I have learned in my 2 years of living here this time around, I've lived in Japan before, is you never want to go to the movie theater opening if there's an opening weekend for a big animated movie. It's gonna be hellishly jammed. It was surprisingly crowded today, even though I went. It was like 3 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Um, but anyway, let's kind of get right into it. So this movie has been stirring up quite a lot of interest online. Let's call it that. And I do think that honestly, it really is kind of amazing just how much people have decided to be dicks about this movie. What do I think about this movie in short? It's all right. It's got its good points, it's got its bad points. It really, at the end of the day, feels very much like a sort of mid-level in terms of the Marvel movies. Personally, I would still consider Thor: The Dark World to be the worst of the Marvel movies. Um, and that, I think, is really kind of the thing that really is the worst part about this whole thing, is that it's just a pretty average movie. It definitely has its moments where it's really good, and it has some moments where it's not very good at all. So let's kind of get right into it now. I'm gonna be talking spoilers here, so why are you even watching this video if that's an issue for you? So let's kind of just get right into things. As I said, the story is pretty average. I was never bored during the movie, like some other people have complained, but I was never really on the edge of my seat. I mean, I didn't find myself looking at my watch or anything like that while I was watching it, but I was just like, yeah, okay, the movie's going along, it's doing okay. Again, there was no real edge of my seat moment where I was super pumped to see, okay, what's going to happen next. Another criticism that this movie has been hit with is that it's pushing that 90s nostalgia too hard. This, I think, is a valid criticism. Now, the story takes place in 1995, and I'm old enough that I remember 1995 pretty clearly. And there was, well, the music in general was very, some of the best of the 90s. I mean, you've got Nirvana, you've got Hole, you got Garbage, oh, good, TLC was in there. They were never the hugest band out there, but Elastica had a great song in there. You even get to see a poster for Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, which was, oh boy, mid-90s music doesn't get any more mid-90s than that. And boy, man, the Pumpkins had some really good songs on that album. That one was always one of my favorites back in the day. But it did get a little old after a while. It's like, there's this joke from an episode of South Park that I'm familiar with but haven't actually seen, with the whole member berries, where the berries are going like, hey, remember this? And that's kind of felt like what this movie was doing with the 90s. It's sort of like, okay, it's like, oh yeah, True Lies, that was a great movie. I remember seeing that. And oh, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Like, oh man, Radio Shack, that place is gone. And then after a while, it's sort of like, okay, yes, I get it. It's 1995. The world was different then. I remember 1995. I was there. Especially like when they got to the point with like AOL passwords and people just being like loading. And again, that's a pretty good indication of what using a computer in the 90s was like. But nonetheless, it definitely did get to some like, all right, I have not forgotten this movie is set in 1995. You can lay off already. So now the other thing here is the whole feminism angle of the thing. And this, I think, is, there are two sides to this issue, and I think both of them are making some good points. On the one hand is that this movie is kind of a feminist allegory, and well, that's kind of always been one of Miss Marvel's, Captain Marvel. Well, she was Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, whatever you want to call her, binary. That's always kind of been in hardcore in the DNA of the character for most of her time as a character. Not from the very beginning, but pretty much as soon as she became Captain Marvel. I mean, the original Captain Marvel was basically her boyfriend, and then she took up the mantle. But anyway, that sort of thing has really kind of been in the DNA of the character since she really took off on her own as a superhero. If you ever kind of go and read some of those 70s Marvel comics, at times Carol was both sort of a good embodiment of what was going on with second wave feminism, as well as at times an embodiment of all that era's feminism's worst aspects. I mean, it really just depended on the story and who was writing it. But the idea that Carol was meant to be one of the real flagship female characters of the Marvel Universe is not a new one. And the idea of her kind of basically being the closest thing that Marvel has to its own Wonder Woman. Again, this is not a new idea. This has been around for a really long time. She's never quite pulled that off, but her being up there among the ranks of Marvel heroes, of being someone who is respected and powerful, that's not a new idea. That is not a new idea at all. So let's be clear on that. But I think one of the problems was that I think in the story is that in terms of having real character flaws, the story never really allowed Carol to have that. The closest one was where she seemed to like be kind of a hothead for no real reason. Like at the start of the movie where she is having that sparring with her commanding officer and then hits him with her powers, even though he's expressly stated like, okay, in this sparring match, no powers, which just made Carol seem really childish and petty. And that's a real disservice to the character, because if you go into the stories, if you go into the lore, Carol is a much better and much more fleshed out person. She does genuinely have some real serious flaws. The idea, like she is, I think, in my personal assessment, she's somebody who is at times overly beholden to rules and authority. But Carol's somebody who spent a lot of her time as a career military officer. Well, of course she's going to take things like that extremely seriously. There are aspects of her character that, I mean, the movie didn't seem like it would ever dream of touching. Like, one of my favorite storylines ever for Carol was back during Kurt Busiek's using her in the 90s when he was working with George Perez after the end of Heroes Reborn. And that really kind of revolved in a lot of ways around her having a descent into alcoholism. And it was a really good story where at time that really built naturally over time to where it reached a head where she was basically drunk during an Avengers mission and got kicked off the team. And Tony Stark had to come to her and say, like, look, nobody gets where you're coming from more than I do. Let me help you. And eventually she got a handle on this and was able to redeem herself in a really spectacular fashion. It was one of those moments when I'm reading the story, I'm like, yeah, you really wanted to cheer for her because she had overcome something really difficult. And it felt natural and it felt earned. And here, that just didn't quite work. I mean, we're getting these little shots of her past, which generally seem to be a man in the past told her that, like, basically laughed at her when she failed at something. And okay, this kind of makes, like, Carol has never had a good relationship with a man in her entire life, which, again, not true in keeping with the comics, although she's also had some extraordinarily bad ones. But generally speaking, we don't want to talk about the whole Marcus thing from like the 70s because that's super messed up and creepy. And please, please, God, if you don't know, don't read this story or read up about this story. It's one of those things where it's like, how in the name of God was this okay by the editorial staff? But yeah, let's just say that Marvel has definitely done Carol more than a few disservices over the years. But here, it just, again, I think dips too heavily into the feminist allegory here, or the feminist metaphor, whatever you want to say. Oh, hey, fun fact. One of Carol's jobs back in the 1970s was the editor of Woman magazine, owned by J. Jonah Jameson. Also, fun fact, she and Spider-Man actually went out on a date once. It was actually quite cute. Anyway, getting back on track. More positive things about the film. All right, so I did like her commanding officer. They did present him as a much more rounded person. He doesn't really seem like he's evil. He's just somebody who's really bought into the nationalism of the Kree. Maria Rambeau, I thought she was one of the really best characters in the entire film. And I kind of like how they snuck in her call sign being Photon, which is a sort of a nod to one of her identities in the comics. Or should I say, Monica Rambeau's identities in the comics. Obviously, they're kind of setting adult Monica up for the future Avengers, Captain Marvel movie. Okay, cool, that's fine. Monica Rambeau isn't a character I know especially well. I read a little bit of her in Avengers, a little bit of hers in, what was it, Next Wave? But not a character I feel particularly connected to. Really great to see Greg Clark back and Samuel L. Jackson all CGI de-aged. Again, the banter between Jackson and Larson was really, again, one of the best things about the movie. And I'm fine with the way they handled the Supreme Intelligence and changing the original Marvel. I mean, they did a very good job of simplifying Carol's origin, which, if you're familiar with the actual origin from the comics from the 1970s, is kind of convoluted. What else did I need to talk about? Oh yeah, so the Skrulls. Now I did generally like the idea that it's like, oh well, no, the Skrulls are actually not the bad guys here. The Skrulls over the course of the comics have really varied in terms of, are they like intrinsically evil, or are they just another culture out there in the universe trying to get by the best way they know how? And I did like how Kevin Feige in social media has said, well, the Skrulls are people who have diverse ideologies. So this particular group of Skrulls is peaceful. They just want to be left alone. But it's safe to say that not all Skrulls are like this. Now, this story obviously draws some lines from one of the most famous Skrull storylines, Secret Invasion. And I like how Feige was smart enough to leave the door open for a more proper, more authentic telling of Secret Invasion sometime in the future, where maybe the heroes have to deal with some Skrulls who are not uh, peaceful. And Secret Invasion had its flaws, but in general, it was a pretty fun and pretty good story. So I'd be totally open to that. And again, Talos definitely made for some nice comedy, and he did make some very good points. And I also sort of liked how he acknowledged, like, I've got blood on my hands too. Like when he sort of has his scientist tech guy uh, more or less taking Monica hostage, and the heroes are like, "Wait, you want us to trust you, and you're taking a kid hostage?" And he's just like, yeah, okay, that's fair. That's a fair criticism." Um, and so I did like that. That was an unexpected twist, and it worked, I think, really well. I mean, I was a little weirded out by the whole Skrull with an Australian accent thing, but yeah, sure, why not? We've got a whole bunch of aliens with American and British and accents and whatnot. So sure, let's have an Australian Skrull. It's certainly not the weirdest thing that has ever happened in comics. I mean, for God's sake, the official Marvel universe had a French mutant who looked like a monkey and whose name was Surrender Monkey, whose power was always knowing when to surrender. And I swear to you, I am not making this up. This is a real established character in the Marvel universe. And this isn't something from like the 60s or something. This is something from like the 2000s. Ecstatics was the series. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what to make of that one, thinking back on it. So, at the end of the day, there's there's a lot more I could probably say at this movie, but I think I've kind of gotten to the heart of it, that it's not really a bad movie in any true way, shape, or form. It's a movie with some serious flaws and some definite pros. Oh yeah, what the hell? How in the world was Carol playing Street Fighter II in 1989? That game was released in 1991. And oh, double yeah, thank you, Stan, at the beginning of the movie. Great. Thank you, comma, Stan, period. How in the name of all that is holy can so many people work on a movie like this and not be able to point out, like, oh, hey, sentences require punctuation? This is, oh God, this is like seeing the Doctor Who Facebook page that, is obviously run by somebody who does not know how to properly punctuate a sentence. I know I seem a little ridiculous on this, but I work in education. I work in English education. This is literally my job. So, obviously, we're going to get to see Carol in Avengers Endgame. Captain Marvel 2 is already in the works. In fact, on social media, they have even said what they want to do is introduce, Kamala Khan in Captain Marvel 2. Now, where they'll take her from there, whether it's going to be movies, or I've heard people talk about Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, as a possible character to sort of bring to television. I mean, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been on the small screen for quite a while. They're probably going to want to wrap that up eventually within the next couple of years, and then Marvel's going to be looking for a new TV show probably on a major network. Runaways was Hulu, New Warriors, and Cloak and Dagger are on networks that are not the hugest networks. Inhumans didn't quite pan out the way they'd hoped, but something like Miss Marvel, if they could get it on a big network like ABC, I could see that working really, really well. But we'll just have to wait and see. For Kamala Khan alone, I am totally down for Captain Marvel 2. And I just hope that the people who are making this movie are going to look at the feedback they've been getting and say, okay, here's what worked and here's what didn't. Let's keep the stuff that worked, fix the stuff that didn't, and try and make a better movie next time. And Marvel has generally done fairly well with that. Thor: The Dark World being an exception. So we'll have to see. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, please comment, rate, subscribe, and take care and have a good one.